two-tier health checks. Recently I was chatting to a Filipino medical worker at a party and they shared some indignation with me. Why do they have to go through so many checks when entering the UK and then the illegal immigrants have no checks at all? They had to undergo a raft of tests. Think contagious diseases, serious or terminal illnesses, diseases that are expensive to treat. It's one thing to have a diabetic, indeed you'd lose a lot of nurses if we sent home all the diabetic Filipinos. But AIDS, cancer, heart disease, we as a country don't want them, it seems, and we check them thoroughly to make sure we don't take on this burden. I guess it makes sense. We employ people in the NHS to work in the NHS. We don't want them to turn up as a customer for the NHS. A friend of mine worked in Asia and he had to have a thorough medical test with follow-ups, taking samples of his skin after the doctor noted a skin tag. There was no way they were going to allow anyone in that was going to be a drain of more than them having a few too many calories. Remember, during the end of days of lockdown, we had masks, injections, controls on everything. We couldn't travel without having a COVID test. And when we went on that flight, there was a good chance we'd be checked at the other end. I knew people who had valid visas cancelled because it was different. You can't travel during these times. Yeah, people came off the boats without any checks at all. You don't need one to enter. We had many complaints about the BB Stockholm, but they had dentists and nurses on call. I broke a tooth during the first lockdown, and I found that dentists had no interest in accepting NHS patients. Told that I'd lost most of a tooth, had severe pain, and bits of the tooth were coming out all the time, dentist told me to call back in a year to see if they had places. Business is business, and I get it. But the fact remains, it's next to impossible to get an NHS dentist if you're in the country legally. I called a dozen surgeries and eventually got into one purely through friends and contacts, not websites and phone numbers and filling out forms. There's a two-tier standard for healthcare, and I don't blame two-tier Kia for this one. Enter the UK legally, you have to undertake a raft of tests. Come on a raft and you don't need to. Extend it further. My friend had a child with a master's degree student, spent 2 years fighting for the return of his fiancée and children. It was very hard for him to get her in. For thousands of tourists or business undergrads who come here, drop out after a year, and drive taxis for the rest of their lives, it's fine. No one seems to push. But he couldn't have his child and future wife with him in the UK. Hoops had to be jumped through. The system sometimes feels like it's set up for those who use and abuse it, not for those who want to do the right thing. We're often told the NHS wouldn't run without foreign migrants. But why do we treat them worse than the fighting age men who destroy their passports having travelled through half a dozen safe countries and paid to be illegally smuggled into the UK? There is a fundamental dishonesty about the way we discuss and manage migration in this country. Until we have fair, consistent policies, people will question the entire process and the motivations behind them. No wonder tens of thousands of fighting age men come from poor nations and pay to illegally cross the channel. The French escort you to the middle. The RNLI ship you to the shore. The government houses you, clothes you, asks nothing much of you, and provides health care that's not available to taxpayers, while you work illegally, delivering food and groceries on bikes and scooters that you don't have a license for and don't know the rules for. What could possibly go wrong? What's the downside? The downside for me is that By providing this two-tier system, there's an inequity and a wrongness which cuts to the heart of the British concept of being fair. The system isn't fair, the system doesn't want to be fair, and the system doesn't want to be honest.